order at 7:05 p.m. At this time, would everyone willing and able please stand for the invocation given by Alderman Kirby, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Happy New Year. Heavenly Father, I ask that you bestow your blessings upon this body for the very first time this year as we embark on the business of the city, which each of us was elected to do. I want to thank you in advance because it's you who will lead, guide, and direct as only you can. I further ask you let no man or woman depart this chamber with bitterness in their hearts. This I ask in your mighty, magnificent, powerful name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panlady.
Present.
Alderman Budge.
Here.
Alderman Payon.
Here.
Alderwoman Pendel Charles.
Present.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Present.
Alderman Lippman.
Present.
Alderman Kirby.
Present.
Alderman Pfeiffer. Alderman Arnett.
Here. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our first item?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The first item on the agenda is the approval of agenda.
At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended to add 0317, the annual city budget submission dates on first reader, and the City Council citation of Megan Matthews and Gail Ann Leham, and the removal of City Council citation to David Jarrell, Public Works Director.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Mr. Mayor, for point of order, would you mind just letting everyone else know why we're removing the citation for David Jarrell?
He couldn't make it with us tonight, and we thought it'd be more appropriate to have it when he's here.
Thank you. I knew that. I just thought everyone else
He was
might not know
leaving
that.
and we don't like him anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Lippman.
Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The next item on the agenda is petitions, reports, and communications, beginning with the reports by committees.
Is there any alderperson that would like to present a report? Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, on behalf of the Public Safety Committee, as well as I suspect most residents of the city, I'd like to acknowledge today is National Public Safety Awareness Day. So I think it would be appropriate that we give all of our public safety officials within our city a round of applause and our heartfelt gratitude for all that you do for our city. And the Public Safety Committee is scheduled to meet next Monday, but because it's a holiday, we're moving it to Wednesday. But because we have conflicts, we may have to cancel that meeting. So please stay tuned.
Alderman Payan?
Thank you. The Economic Matters Committee will, as of now, is scheduled to meet next Wednesday at 6:30 right here in City Hall. We have not met since since our last convocation here as a council before Christmas. At that time, we will discuss pending legislative matters. If we actually hold it next Wednesday, as my colleague from Ward 4 stated, we do have some conflicts and might end up postponing it from next Wednesday.
Is there anyone else? Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is comments by the general public.
During comments by the general public, you can speak on anything that is not already scheduled for a public hearing. When you come forward, please state your name and address for the record, and you have up to 5 minutes to speak. The first three speakers are William S. Keys, Maurician Rodriguez, and Suzanne Martin.
name's AMSP. I'm 95 years old, and I live in Northern Bay. Also a substitute teacher at South River High, when I want. But I'm here representing the association that is trying to do good to the people who come from all over the world here. And we hope that they'll treat better and good, well as we treat our natives here, people from all over the United States. So I brought with me my guardian son here, Arturo. He's got 4 names, so I can't never remember all 4 at the same time. So he is doing a very good job at Annapolis High School. And so, as well as Mark and his mother here, Rodriguez, they are both doing a tremendous job trying to improve programs and things for these people. Thank you very much for permitting me to speak.
I'm Dr. Marciana Rodriguez. I live at 502 Birch Drive, Annapolis, Maryland. I support the non-discrimination of foreign-born residents ordinance. I do this because I'm an educator at Annapolis High School, and discrimination against immigrant students is unacceptable, and under the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Clyburn v. Stowe, unconstitutional. When I am overwhelmed by the sadness of the life stories of my students, I think about the power of education to change their stars after they have endured the unendurable. And I am calm. Education is a hopeful alternative to interrupt. Slowly but surely, sad expressions and fearful glances give way to grins brimming with joy at the idea of transformation. Disaffected youth should not be permitted to flourish in our city. And education is the antidote to that. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I hope that you pass the ordinance so that we can embark on that change. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Martin. I live at 118 Maple Drive and have lived here for 13 years. This is a picture of my great-grandmother and her family from the early 1900s. My grandmother was 3 years old when her family came over here on a ship from Italy looking for a better life. As you can see from examining this picture, they were very poor but made ends meet by running a produce stand off the streets in Providence, Rhode Island. They had nothing but hope for creating a better life for themselves as well as for future generations. Many sitting in this room had ancestors that came here under very different circumstances of which we can never forget. I believe we need to stop and think about the newer immigrants living in our communities now. Stop and think. What would it take? How bad would it have to be for you and your family to decide to abandon your home and everything you know to make a possibly dangerous journey to a foreign country to start all over again from scratch? What would it take? How bad would it have to get for you? We have 2 girls ages 12 and 11. Our one daughter is a 5th grader and our other daughter is a 7th grader at Annapolis Middle School. I love that my girls are in schools that are so diverse. It enriches their lives and their friendships. My wish is that we stop seeing our Hispanic and Latino brothers and sisters as those immigrants and start seeing them inclusively with us. And I hope that this ordinance gives them this message as well as strengthens their trust in our city police. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next three people signed up to speak, the Reverend Ryan Sermons, Jose Martinez, and Julia, I believe, Butner or Buller.
Grace and peace be with you. My name is Ryan Sermons. I'm a resident at 38 Pleasant Street in Ward 2 of this city. When Moses received the law that was to govern the people of Israel, newly arrived in a land after seeking freedom from the oppression of Pharaoh and Egypt, it was given with the provision, "With me you are but aliens and tenants," in Leviticus. The newly freed people had arrived in the promised land, a land already populated with people and given to them. But they received this reminder that even though the land may be theirs, they still are themselves aliens and tenants of God. The psalmist put it best when it comes to human relationship with the world. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Not ours, not theirs, but God's. And we are all, each of us, aliens and tenants of this land, forging communities that are strengthened and beautified by the diversity and richness of our people. The proposed legislation, non-discrimination for foreign-born residents, respects the principle that we are all equal in the eyes of God. It also codifies a related provision of the Bible's legal code, which states, "You shall have one statute for both the resident alien and the native." This was so important that it was listed twice in the book of Numbers and again in the book of Leviticus. This ordinance, introduced by Alderman Littman, Alderman Pfeiffer, Alderwoman Finlayson, Alderman Kirby, and Alderman Arnett, allows our law enforcement to follow one statute for all the people of the city of Annapolis. And when there is only one statute, people can rely upon and develop trust, knowing that some won't be held to a different standard than others. People who are worried about their or their neighbor's immigration status can call our public safety professionals secure in the knowledge that they will respond to real safety and security issues without fear of further investigation or immigration status. They can be assured of freedom from harassment based upon presumptions of their immigration status as well. I've been a resident of here since 2013. My neighbors, I find, are diverse and increasingly so, and some have been here for generations, but others have lived here only a short time. Each are equal and loved in the eyes of God. This proposed ordinance allows us to live together secure in the trust that we will all be held to that same standard, and that together we can build that safe and trusting community which people have moved here for generations, and which this city champions in every way, even in that picture behind us. I also hope that through this legislation, that safety and that trust can be developed such that we can tackle the real issues that face the people here, on providing education, on tackling some of the drug epidemics that we know are killing our people, on tackling the gun violence, and the violence itself that led to the highest homicide count in the city, or for decades that this city has seen. Thank you for your time, and thank you for considering this ordinance.
Jose Martinez and Julia Butner or Buller, and then Mark Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. The United States is famously a nation of immigrants, comprised of people and the descendants of people who came to our country from all over the world seeking a better life. Like many in this room, My own great-grandparents immigrated from Ireland in the late 1800s. My great-grandmother first came and worked as a hotel maid before returning to Ireland to help bring my great-grandfather over. They initially settled in Boston before moving to Detroit, where he worked as a custodian. His son, my Grandpa Lane, became an engineer and was a pilot navigator in World War II. He raised a wonderful family, and my mother and aunts are teachers here in Annapolis now. This is the American dream. Working with new immigrants over the past year here in Annapolis, I have witnessed firsthand the significant stress and complexity involved in adapting to a new country. I've had the opportunity to work with newcomer students juggling a full high school class load and multiple jobs just to help their families survive. I've worked with neighbors of different cultures and languages, resolve disputes over a seemingly mundane but critical issue, trash pickup. I've testified in support of a new business owner seeking to finally open his own restaurant here in Annapolis after working 17 years as a dishwasher. The newest members of our community bring resiliency and vibrancy to our culture, all while seeking to provide a good life for their families. While we have been working with the community and stakeholders, many of whom you will hear from tonight, on this legislation for over 6 months, the need for the non-discrimination of foreign-born residents ordinance was made abundantly clear to me this morning at a roundtable discussion on victims of violence, abuse, resources for the Hispanic and Latino community. The story that was shared was about a young woman here in Annapolis who was raped and became pregnant. She was fired from her job at a fast food restaurant because her employer considered her a liability. At 8 months pregnant, no one would hire her. She lives in a house with several people, and the rapist or rapists also live in the house. 2 weeks after giving birth, she found a job so that she could care for herself and her daughter. She is currently behind on rent. This young woman doesn't feel comfortable seeking the help and protections afforded by law that you or I would seek because she doesn't want to risk her status in this country and doesn't trust the system to protect her and her child. This ordinance extends equal rights and protections to all residents of Annapolis, regardless of where you came from. It will ensure that city tax dollars and resources are used for the benefit of the city and its residents, and will strengthen trust between the community and Annapolis Police and Fire Departments, thus increasing public safety for everyone. Crime, particularly domestic violence and sexual assault, is significantly underreported in the Hispanic and Latino community. This is primarily due to fear that a victim's immigration status may be questioned and their safety in our community may be jeopardized. The local police agree that their job is not to act as a federal immigration enforcement officers, nor do they want to. No resident of Annapolis should feel unsafe or be a victim of crime, any crime. The core function of government should be to protect the community they serve. In an age where we need to be proactive about policies that will strengthen the practice of community policing, having protections in place for victims and witnesses to come forward to report crimes that occur in the city is something that will benefit all Annapolitans. I can't help but consider the relevance and importance, today more than ever, on the cusp of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, of working toward an ever more inclusive and welcoming society that will benefit everyone. Why this? Why now? Because as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the time is always right to do what is right. When every family does better, our community will thrive. Thank you.
Next 3 people signed up to speak: Ed Connors, Janet Norman, and Lisa Rodvine.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, good evening. My name is Ed Connors. I live at 63 Baldridge Road over in Admiral Heights. I'm here today, tonight, to extend my gratitude to the city and its departments for its response to the yard waste issue in the last week between Christmas and New Year's. I also plead guilty for sticking my head in the sand and not really knowing about the full extent of the ban on plastic bags that started last week on the first of the year. And I also have this 80-foot sycamore tree that doesn't drop its leaves until Christmas time. So I'm always the last guy on the block to bag his leaves. Anyway, I put all my leaves in plastic bags thinking I had the 28th of December as the last yard waste pickup day. A number of my neighbors felt the same way, as I'll mention later. But 28th came and went. The bags were still there. The 29th came, and I had orange stickers on my bags that said, "Sorry, you're going to have to take all these bags, 73 of them, and put all these contents into paper bags. And the next pickup will be later in the new year." Well, I was quite alarmed, and so was my son, who helped me bag those leaves. So I put in an email to my alderman, Fred Payon, city manager, and Tom Andrews, the director of public works, David Jarrell, and anybody else I could copy on that email. And I have to tell you, within 2 hours, there was responses all over the place, from Tom Andrews to Fred Payon, from David Jarrell to Tom Andrews, Fred Payon to me, Fred Payon to my neighbors. I took a look around my neighborhood. There were 27 people who put bags out for that pickup that same day. So a lot of people didn't know, and I looked at the website, and it was a little confusing, the pickup schedule. It didn't say specifically that there would not be a pickup on the 28th. Regardless, the city reacted quickly and efficiently and scheduled a special pickup on the last day of the year, the 31st, on Saturday. And at the end of that day, all of my bags and all of my neighbors' bags were gone. So I just want to stand here tonight and thank my alderman, Fred Payon, city manager, Tom Andrews, head of public works, David Jarrell, and Phil Scrivener, who picked up the phone and called me during that time period and talked to me directly. I was not alone. I was not the only one who brought this to the attention of the city. And I just want to say sometimes you guys don't get enough credit. City government sometimes works quietly and efficiently, and we all come to expect certain services. But in this case, the city responded quickly and efficiently to a sudden need by a large cross-section of the community. And so I'm here to thank you all for your work. Keep it up. And one final word, I support paper. Paper bags from now on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Mr. Mayor, you might want at this time to kind of reiterate what the new policy is about paper and the date certain when that takes effect.
The new policy came from Anne Arundel County. They no longer accept plastic bags, so all bags have to be put in paper, or you can go to the Public Works on Spa Road and you can get free recycling bins. Just like we did the plastic ones with wheels on them, they have wheels on them for yard waste. So people have found those very effective, and we're actually getting some new, bigger ones as well.
Okay.
Ms. Norman?
Thank you, Mayor. Janet Norman, 787 Annapolis Neck Road, Ward 7. I'm going to try and get through without a coughing fit, so if I have to leave, I apologize. Someone I knew came here to Annapolis by himself at age 17 on a train from a very long way away. He came from a poor family. He had 6 kids in his family, very little money or other funds except his brains and hard work. People weren't very welcoming to his kind, didn't really think they belonged here. His grandparents were immigrants to Canada, and they crossed the border to the U.S. The year was 1917, and he arrived here at the Naval Academy from upstate New York. This was my grandfather. His grandparents had come over on the Irish potato famine ships to Quebec, and no one really wanted their contribution to and saw them as valuable to the community. But they were. He served in World War II. He served as the aide to the commandant at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and hosted author Margaret Mitchell of Gone with the Wind and Madame Chiang Kai-shek. I want you to know that my son, his great-grandson, is lucky enough to be in advanced Spanish at Annapolis High. In his class last year, there were 13 native speakers and 5 Anglo speakers. Think of the advantage he had in that Spanish class, learning from people with modern vocabulary, slang, pronunciation, that maybe none of his peers in Severna Park would have had that advantage at all. I see it as a huge benefit to being at Annapolis High that he has the diversity to know, understand, and learn from so many cultures. My sister is an editor at the Associated Press in London, where it's a requirement that you are highly competent in another language. You are tested before they'll even hire you. Most of the people in her office speak 4 to 5 languages. So we're now in this global world where we can't insulate ourselves from others, or our Annapolis residents lose out. I support the non-discrimination ordinance because it makes the best economic sense for our students, our city, our vitality. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. Where else in a small city of 39,000 can my kids be comfortable with people from any culture, anywhere, and grow up and be able to move around the world with that fluency of cultures and skills that they've acquired. I'm not naive to think that every single person immigrating to Annapolis is pure of heart. 2 stabbings that occurred by Quiet Waters Park were 75 yards from my house. And my husband was the first one on the scene before the police. It was horrible. But I don't paint an entire culture by the actions of a few. Just like I don't hold it against every older white male in Annapolis that they might be a criminal, like the Annapolitan charged with national security fraud, who jeopardized many lives posing as an expert. I hope you will continue to be extending all the services needed, like Mr. Rodriguez said, to our citizens, and making this the most diverse, interesting, dynamic place to be, that we all want to live here and want to learn from our neighbors around town. Thank you.
Alderman Kirby?
Yeah. I did see your message today from the PTSA.
Yes.
And I assume it went to all of my colleagues?
Yes, it did.
Okay, I think it's a very noble cause, and if you're asking us to lean on Alderman Payon, we will
He
assist
did pledge
you.
his support prior to me even emailing you. What Mr. Kirby is, Councilman Kirby is referring to is the Annapolis High School Parent-Teacher Association has put in a grant application to the Annapolis Rotary for support for our students of need for transportation, bus tickets, as our high school has its clubs and help days and stuff after school, and many of our students don't have transportation. And I mentioned to you that the one outstanding student, former president of the senior class, Dwan Gay, was one of those students that needed assistance with transportation and had to have a second job to pay $20 to get cab fare to get to school. So we really want to invest in our young people, and we hope that they can turn out half as awesome as Dwan Gay and others. So I appreciate the council's support for all those activities at Annapolis High. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It's up to the Annapolis Rotary.
I'll do my best.
Good evening, Mayor Pantelides and members of the City Council. My name is Lisa Rodvian, and I live at 219 Farragut Road in Annapolis, Ward 2. I want to start by just asking anyone that has ancestors or is themselves foreign-born, please raise your hand. That's what I thought. This bill touches an issue close to my heart, as because many of my family currently living are immigrants. I have an adopted brother who is an immigrant from Liberia in West Africa. I met him when I was 8 years old and he was 18. He came to the United States first on a foreign exchange program, but then returned to the United States 10 years later when his country broke out into civil war. Before he left his home, he had started the university, and because of the war, all of the schools closed. His family had to leave his home, and at more than one point, he had a gun held to his head. My family sponsored him to come back to the United States, and I will never have a more special and amazing brother. He's now an executive vice president at MasterCard International. I'm also, and he's obviously contributing very well to our economy. I'm also a former ESOL teacher, and I have worked with many amazing immigrant children here in Annapolis, including some who've experienced great hardship before, during, and after their immigration to the U.S. Since many of the foreign-born residents of Annapolis that would be impacted by the legislation you're considering are from Central America, my testimony tonight is an excerpt from a book called Enrique's Journey by Sonia Nazario. The book begins with an overview of a not uncommon journey for a teenage boy or girl traveling from Central America to the United States. As I read this excerpt, I ask you to ask yourself, what circumstances would compel you to say goodbye to your home and everyone and everything you know in order to have a slim chance for a better life? That's what these young people are facing. Here's the excerpt. The journey is hard for the Mexicans, but still harder for Enrique and the others from Central America. They must make the dangerous trek up the length of Mexico. Counselors and immigration lawyers say only half of them get help from smugglers. The rest travel alone. They are cold, hungry, and helpless. They are hunted like animals by corrupt police, bandits, and gang members who have been deported from the United States. A University of Houston study found that most are robbed, beaten, raped, and usually more than once. Some are killed. They set out with little or no money. Thousands, shelter workers say, make their way through Mexico clinging to the sides and tops of freight trains. Since the 1990s, Mexico and the United States have tried to thwart them. To evade Mexican police and immigration authorities, the children, jump onto and off of the moving train cars. Sometimes they fall and the wheels tear them apart. They navigate by word of mouth or by the arc of the sun. Often they don't know where or when they will get their next meal. Some go days without eating. If a train stops even briefly, they crouch by the tracks, cup their hands, and steal sips of water from shiny puddles tainted with diesel fuel. At night, they huddle together on the train cars or next to the tracks. They sleep in trees, in tall grass, or in beds made of leaves. Some are very young. Mexican rail workers have encountered 7-year-olds on their way to find their families. A policeman discovered a 9-year-old boy near the downtown Los Angeles tracks. I'm looking for my mother, he said. The youngster had left Puerto Cortes in Honduras 3 months before. He had been guided only by his cunning and the single thing he knew about her, where she lived. He had asked everyone, how do I get to San Francisco? Regardless of the exact path that brought these young men and young women to the United States, every foreign-born resident in Annapolis must adapt to a new way of life and a new home. Many are learning a new language. As their neighbors, we have two choices. We can be welcoming and kind and helpful, or we can look the other way and treat our neighbors as less than human. I hope our City Council will choose the first of these two and ensure that they do not face discrimination here in Annapolis, and we are a city of open arms. Thank you.
She was the last person signed up to speak. If anybody else would like to address the council, please come forward. Now is your opportunity. Seeing no motion, I declare comments by the general public closed. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is update from the mayor.
All right. I hope everyone had a happy new year. This update of the mayor is a little bit different. Normally we talk about ribbon cuttings and other things we've done, but this is more in response to something the Capitol had written, which was their year in review. They basically asserted that Annapolis had, I want to say, one of the worst years ever. They highlighted on racial tensions, about things that are going wrong in the city. So I wanted to highlight some of the positives, and I don't normally read off a list, but I'm going to do so now. So in the first one, we hired our first African American and Hispanic community service specialist in the mayor's office. We made major improvements to City Dock. We replaced the bulkhead on schedule and $1 million under budget. We passed the Forest Conservation Ordinance, which was supported by local environmentalists and had been in the work for years. We nominated 3 new Housing Authority officials to the board, and they had extensive financial, legal, and economic experience that added. We had the first conservation easement in the city since 2003. We added 2.5 acres on the easement at Bay Village Assisted Living to over 100 acres held in easement by the Annapolis Conservancy Board. The police seized a record number of handguns. We created the first Hispanic bilingual television program that is aired on both City TV and our website. We passed an adequate facility ordinance, and I want to thank everyone on the council. I know we've been working on that for a very long time, that stops development from overcrowding our schools. We offered upgrades to parking options, including paying by phone. Alderwoman Rhonda Pendle Charles and I hosted a job fair with Maryland Live at the rec center, where they're offering 150 jobs for people to work up there at the casino. We hosted the city's first Maritime Summit, which brought together more than 100 maritime businesses in the marine and maritime industries. We had our credit rating reviewed by Fitch and Standards & Poor's and actually got an upgrade by Moody's. We hosted the second annual job fair at the Pitt Moyer Rec Center. We reorganized government and streamlined the development review process. We lowered the solid waste fees by 5% in 2016 for a total of 31.25% over the last 3 years, and we opened or expanded 128 new businesses. So that's my update from the mayor. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is a ceremonial item, City Council citation to Megan Matthews and Gail Ann Lehman.
They could join me at the front, please. We have a citation for Gail Ann Lehman, Annapolis firefighter first class. On behalf of the citizens of the City of Annapolis, we are pleased to confer upon you this City Council citation in recognition of your fast response and professional actions that saved a life in October 2016. We acknowledge that during the Howland Hustle 5K that benefits more than 7,000 athletes of the Special Olympics, a participant in the race crossed the finish line and several minutes later collapsed. As a participant in the race, you immediately responded to the call for help and realized her heart had stopped beating. We applaud you for instantly starting CPR on the woman, at which time you were responsible for restoring the woman's heartbeat, saving her life. The patient was transported from the event to the Anne Arundel Medical Center by the Annapolis Fire Department and is alive after it was determined she had a rare heart condition. Your contributions to our community have made the City of Annapolis a better place for all Annapolitans, and we honor you here tonight. Given under our hand in the Great Seal of the City of Annapolis on this 9th day of January, 2017. Congratulations. You want to say a few words? Yeah. You want to say a few words?
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, you've heard me say this a million times up here. Learn CPR. It's very easy to learn. It's so easy, we taught the mayor and the council how to do it. So, If they can do it, you guys can do it. But this is a great story because we talk about this all the time, but we have a face today to put to this. This is the young lady right here that Gail saved. This is Kim. Her husband's here. Her son's Jake. Her husband Bill. They're here. So she's alive today, here, standing here because of Gail's CPR skills. So.
As you can imagine, this is a very emotional time for me. I have been so very, very fortunate. God has blessed me with my guardian angel, Miss Lehman, who was rapidly by my side after I collapsed at the end of the 5K. My friend Dee Fox, who is also here with me tonight, got help immediately, and Gail, who was off duty at the time, came to my aid immediately and gave me life-saving CPR, and I am just, I cannot express, words are just not adequate to express how transformational this has been for me, and to have Gail there for me, saving my life and ultimately leading to the discovery of a genetic heart problem that is now managed with a defibrillator, and it also allows me to get my children tested. And without her, my life would not be saved, nor the lives of my children. So thank you very, very much, Gail. Again, just a great gratitude for her skills and for her being able to help me at the right time. Thank you.
Just one little sidebar of this story. This was during the police department 5K run. It was around Halloween time, and people were wearing Halloween costumes in the run, and Gail was dressed as a pumpkin.
We have another city citation for Megan Matthews from Orca Green Maritime. On behalf of the citizens of the city of Annapolis, we are pleased to confer upon you this city council citation. In recognition of your ability to design and build new LED navigational searchlights that enhance fire boat safety, your $4,000 donation to Fireboat 36 has increased its search capabilities and improved firefighter safety while responding to emergency calls at night. The light improves the visibility for 2 nautical miles and increases the likelihood of locating victims in the water after dark. And as you all know, we've had a couple of people fall in the water recently. Your contributions have made the city of Annapolis a safer place for all Annapolitans, and we honor you tonight. Given under our hand in the Great Seal of the City of Annapolis on this 9th day of January, 2017. Congratulations.
Just real quick, each year the fire department develops a list of goals, annual goals to improve our department. And the number one goal is always firefighter safety. And one of our goals as part of that was to enhance their emergency lighting on our vehicles. We went from old-fashioned incandescent halogen lights to LED lighting. And it's very expensive to do that. It's about $6,000 per fire engine to upgrade the LED lighting. But it's a huge difference in the visibility of the vehicle. And the last one we had to do was a fireboat. And it's about $4,000 worth of lights on that fireboat to make it more visible at nighttime. And we were struggling to find the money to do that. And this young lady designed the system and put the lights on the fireboat for us. So it's a much safer boat for our people. It's much more effective. So we thank you very much for doing that.
Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is also a ceremonial item that gives me great personal pleasure. A City Council citation to Gary M. Elson, Acting City Attorney.
We have a citation here for Gary Elson. He acted in the role of city attorney when we were looking to fill it, and I got to say you did a tremendous job. It is not an easy one. I think you, Mike, and anybody who sat in that chair, it's a hot spot. You got 9 bosses all dragging you around, pulling you in different directions. You got the public, different groups, city organizations. It's one of the tougher jobs in the city, and you handled it well. And I know you spent a lot of nights and a lot of weekends taking late emails from me, so thank you for that.
Mr. Elson, before he even gets started, I want you to know I co-sign that. I didn't get the message, but I'll definitely sponsor you. I'll put you through a lot.
On behalf of the citizens of the City of Annapolis, we're pleased to confer upon you this City Council citation in recognition of dedicating your professionalism and talents to the City of Annapolis as Acting City Attorney from June 14th to December 18th, 2016. Your experience and professional manner served the city well as you accomplished the duties and fulfilled the responsibilities of the office. We acknowledge your dedication and applaud your work ethic. We acknowledge that you have returned to your position as Assistant City Attorney, where you continue to build on the many accomplishments in the office. Given under our hand and the Great Seal of the City of Annapolis on this 9th day of January, 2016. Congratulations. Speech.
Point here, but thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I really do appreciate it, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to have served you as acting city attorney for the past 6 months, and also for I think it was about 4 months during your first year. And I feel like I'm very much a part of your administration. I thank you for that. I enjoy being city attorney. I enjoy also having Mike Leahy back to take over again. I think we're like ping pong balls. We go back and forth between the two of us, but I think Mike's here for the duration now. I'd also like to thank all members of the City Council, all 8 of you, and the mayor, obviously, but all 8 of you have been very good to me over the years and good friends. I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you a little bit more. Getting close to retirement age, but I'm going to be around for a little bit more, I hope. And also I want to thank all the department directors and the city staff. Everyone has been so good to me over these years. I started working for the city in Dennis Callahan's administration in 1986. So I've been here for over 30 years in different capacities, mostly as a contractual employee in the beginning, but becoming exempt service. So I'm thankful for all of that. I love every minute that I've worked for the city. And so thank you very much to everybody.
Would have been a lot easier if Leahy hadn't left you all that work to do.
Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is appointments and reappointments, beginning with AP 20-16, the reappointment of Robert Gallagher to the Board of Appeals.
All right. I would ask, in the issue of time, if there be a motion to accept the appointments as a group.
Second.
Any discussion?
That doesn't mean that we're not thankful for them either volunteering or serving, but
Yes.
in the interest of time.
Thank you.
So moved.
I'm going to read each of their names, but so we vote on them. So the reappointment of Robert Gallagher to the Board of Appeals, the reappointment of Edith Knight to the Human Relations Commission, the reappointment of Diane Graham to the Human Relations Commission, the appointment of Alice Kane to the Education Commission, the reappointment of J. Ronald Cabriel to the Historic Preservation Commission, and the appointment of Peter Trogdon to the Maritime Advisory Board. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the consent calendar.
Is there a motion to approve? Is there any objection to the consent calendar? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Pantelidis?
Aye.
Alderman Kirby? Aye. Alderman Pfeiffer? Alderman Arnett?
Aye.
Alderman Budge?
Aye.
Alderman Payon?
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendel Charles?
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson?
Aye.
Alderman Littman?
Aye. The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is business and miscellaneous, beginning with GT-7-17 from General Fund Reserves Fund Balance to the Annapolis Police Department.
Is there a motion to approve GT 7-17 on first, or GT 17?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in...
Mr. Mayor, I think this is an important thing that we're doing, and so it should get a little bit of discussion. This is at your request, but I think with a lot of support from the council, and certainly, I hope, a lot of support from our constituents to give some much-needed embellishments in terms of staff and cameras and overtime for the police department. So I certainly, I support this, and I think everyone on the council does.
For those of you in the audience waiting, the discrimination bill passed on first reader. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, to piggyback on what Alderman Arnett was just saying, I think it would be appropriate at this time to invite the chief up to kind of give us an overview so the community will have an understanding of how this $1.25 million is going to be used.
Chief Priesthoff, if you'd like to come forward and give us an overview. Whichever one's easier for you.
Chief Mike Priesthoff, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just briefly, the department is obviously going to be very grateful to have the opportunity to be able to use the funds if we're so awarded. I did break down for the Finance Committee earlier last week, precisely what I'll explain to the council. There are generally, there are several categories that we intend to use the funds for. The principal goal of the funding will be to hire police officers. Now, I provided to the city and to the Finance Committee a breakdown of the costs associated with the hiring. We estimate that if we are doing our very best and operate as quickly and efficiently as we can during the remainder of the fiscal year, we could hire upward of 8 additional police officers at a total cost of approximately $540,000 maximum. So putting this estimate forward, I wanted to make sure that we're very clear that the numbers that we're providing the council were somewhat the top end, the maximum amount of what we could expect to incur in cost. So I put forward an estimate of approximately 8 officers over our total table of organization now, which would be 114 officers once we fill our ranks completely this year. So, going forward with that, hiring being the premier goal of the total funding, that would be our focus. And we've done a number of things internally to try to ensure that we can maximize that effort. Obviously, some of the things that we're going to need to do, including with the funding, would be to ensure that we have the proper advertisement and recruitment efforts and some of the methods internally to make sure that we get the right officers, both lateral and new applicants, as quickly and efficiently as possible. In addition, along in that same category, we're hopeful to be able to hire community outreach specialists that we can hire locally from within the community. And these would be, folks that are between, say, the ages of 19 and 21 years of age that can work with our police officers in the department. So somewhat of a cadet program, an on-the-job training program that we can see how they operate and give them the experience they need so that we can determine who could be the best officers from a local perspective. So there are a number of other measures that we're going to take, but again, I'm going to be very clear. The primary focus of any funding that we get will be to hire police officers to get them on the street to help our police presence, both in our crime-fighting strategies and our community outreach strategies. And I'm delighted to answer any particular questions, but moving to the second category would be to fortify our cameras, our closed-circuit television program that we already have in effect. It's a pretty robust program now, where we have access to over 200 cameras in the city, but our hope again is to ensure that we have cameras in all the communities that could use this extra help. These cameras create a force multiplier for our officers. We can use them and have used them to prevent crime and also to clear and solve crime with the help of the state's attorney's office. And so there are several communities that we outline as priorities once we receive the funding that will ensure cameras are set up in those communities, including the Clay Street community, Eastport Terrace, to conclude the Eastport Terrace Harbor House enclave, so that we have cameras throughout both communities together, and then moving on into Robinwood, and as well to at least 8 or 9 intersections throughout the city that we've identified as key point locations where, often we have people going to and from throughout the city that, may be involved in activity that we could use the cameras to catch that activity. And also, just to cap that off, to use license plate recognition technology, which we include in the camera estimate. And the total is about approximately $260,000. We were fortunate enough to get an additional amount of money from the state with the advocacy of the mayor, and we managed to get an additional amount that we've applied already, $87,000 to what we earlier thought was over a $300,000 need. Now we're about $260,000 to conclude that program. That's the short compendium of cameras, but there are a number of things as well. We do want to hire another contract worker to help monitor the cameras. We have one in place now. The third category would be body-worn cameras. This could be a short or a longer range strategy, depending on whether we're able to get full funding. But we are in the tail end of completing our testing phase with our body-worn cameras. We're in the third company right now where officers are on the street with cameras now, deciding whether the camera equipment we have is the appropriate equipment for our police department. And we're going through an assessment process with each of the 3 companies and intend possibly to go to a 4th company. But in very, very short order, we expect to settle on one of the companies. And I mean very short order. It could be in a matter of weeks to make a decision as to which camera company we want to go with. But my request in this allocation is to use some of the funding for the first year of what it will cost us based on the highest price contract that we're aware of now. And I estimate that could be upward of $128,000. Now that amount includes the camera and software. It includes contract deals as we're aware of right now with maintenance and other aspects to get this camera program working. It could be less But again, that is only an estimate for the first year, and any additional funding for the cameras would have to go into consecutive fiscal year budgets. And we do have some understanding of what that will cost, but again, these are estimates right now. I do also include in these estimates, in that $128,000, the cost of redaction services, which again, is a very important part of what we need to do for camera downloads and make sure that the public's protected, and also we present the right information to the state's attorney for prosecution. And that's the third category for allocation. The fourth is generally overtime. We operate in overtime for a number of reasons, including proactive enforcement, shift overtime, crime investigations, community strategies also, including foot patrol. And we estimate that a $130,000 allocation upward of that could go towards our overtime. And that would potentially satisfy some of our operational proactive overtime deployment needs for the remainder of the fiscal year. The last category is equipment and vehicles. Again, when we put our best foot forward and hire these officers, we're going to need probably a few more cars. We're conservative in the estimate we put forward, but there's other equipment as well that we could easily use to our crime fighting and community outreach strategies. I have a list of that equipment. I'd be happy to share it at any time. It's a developing list. And I just want to be very clear that the use of the funding for hiring certainly, is the largest chunk, but I imagine that as we go forward, we may not get to that number, and I would certainly know how to use any unspent funds to offset for either overtime or equipment costs, where that's somewhat of a floating large or small number depending on what funds we have really left after we can't necessarily use it all during hiring. We'll have extra funds to apply to equipment or overtime. But those are the categories that I think with this strategy in place, and again, I've talked to the Finance Committee, the city managers working closely with me, and the mayor's aware of this, and I feel that the department would be supported significantly in our intent to prevent and obviously resolve any crimes in the city of Annapolis, especially violent crimes, and to expand our community approaches.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, one piece of equipment was one that Alderwoman Finlayson, Paone, and I, and the mayor discussed with the Housing Authority, and that's the license plate recognition equipment, which I think, and you can elaborate on this, is very helpful in the battle against drugs and identifying cars that are in our neighborhoods that we don't want there.
Thank you. Yeah, we do use LPR license plate technology already. We have mobile and we have stationary devices. Our intention would be to put at least 2 more units up in different areas in the city. I know where those areas are specifically, and those areas are really where there's main ingress and egress points. They've been very beneficial for investigations, and we will be proceeding with them if we get the funds.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chief. You said 7 categories?
I apologize if I said several.
Oh, several. Okay.
Several, yes,
all right.
ma'am.
Thank you. Thank
yes,
you.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Lippman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you know my concerns. We've talked about it in the past. I guess it'd probably be impossible for you to say how this funding and all those purchases are going to improve reducing crime. But I certainly welcome any comments along those lines you can speak to. Perhaps a better way to approach it is, how will we measure whether this additional funding is successful and well spent?
Thank you. I think there are a lot of things that go into reducing crime and preventing crime. I think that resources play a significant role. Not every aspect of crime reduction is found in money or is found in extra cops or things that we buy. But I think when we have strategies and we see the need to put extra officers on the street for higher visibility and to being in the right areas at the right time, to be in our drug units and to be in our community outreach units, I think that what happens is we limit potential, we limit our risk essentially by being more available and more present. And I think that as well, having the equipment, and I could go into different types of technology, but for the sake of not doing that at the moment, some of the technology and the equipment that we buy makes it speedier to apprehend people who are wanted, and really works in the hands of officers pretty effectively to do that. We do have proof in our deployment with it. And so, I go to say that it's not the only answer, but when we talk about our ability to spend overtime or to be in certain areas and have the extra officers, I think what we're doing is we're increasing the probability that the officers will either be investigating or proactively deployed to help prevent crime. So I think it is a good strategy to have this. To measure the success, I can look at empirical data, and when we had more officers at a point in time, when we were doing different types of enforcement areas, I think that some of the crime reduction was directly resulting from those officers that were properly deployed. And so I'd like to duplicate some of that, but improve on some of that as well, because we do have other strategies in place for Annapolis that will help with the extra officers. But I guess the conversation could go on and on about how some of the equipment works and how the officers may make a difference. But I think that, in my experience, we'll be more capable and ready when we have this.
Well, the funding and the officers and the programs that you've described with this funding, are they to target certain types of crime?
Yeah, well, thank you. The first goal I have is to make sure that our the patrol division is adequately staffed so that we have officers that can quickly get to calls, and we average about an officer gets to a call within 2 minutes. I want to make sure that we're staffed properly. The use of additional officers will probably be going between the neighborhood enhancement teams, which will support our community outreach, and will be essentially foot patrol officers in different communities that are more at risk. And then again, some other officers would be deployed in our drug units and in our operations unit. And yes, those officers would be potentially investigating crimes, but I think with working in the communities, they'll be mostly preventing crime. If I had to measure out what would be more effective, I'd say, well, we want to prevent the crimes. So I think the primary strategy would be to have greater number of officers out there at the right times and the right locations to prevent the crimes, as opposed to solving them.
Mr. Mayor, my follow-up question is more for our finance team, and that's how can we afford this? How can we afford this? We weren't able to afford just 2 officers in the last budget cycle, and now we're coming up with funding for 8 officers out of the fund balance. With at the time when we went through our last budget, we didn't have any surplus, let alone a $1.5 million surplus. Now we're a year in, we're coming up on a new budget cycle. How are we going to afford this?
We'll figure out a way.
Come on, Mr. Andrews, that's not a real answer. We're about to fund
a lot
of officers.
In
These
the
are people
previous,
that are going to have jobs, not just for the next 6 months,
but
but thereafter.
the previous fiscal year, you were well aware that we had a surplus of $2.7 million at the end of the fiscal year due to additional income tax revenue that was not anticipated through the comptroller's office, and as a result of savings during the course of that year. We save money every year. We reverted the fund balance every year that I've been here through prudent management during the course of exercising a budget. We'll continue to do that. We will find the funds necessary to support the request for 10 additional officers.
How are you going to find the money for this fiscal year? I know it's just coming out of fund balance, but that's not an
fund balance for this fiscal year, yes.
Yeah. And what will the net to the fund balance be for the fiscal year, including this impact?
Well, we won't know that until we get the revenue estimates in March.
Projections.
But when we do, you'll be the first to know what we'll be able to do and how we're going to be able to do it.
What are the projections for it to be with
March.
this impact? No, not the time when you expect to have them. What are your projections for the net impact to the fund balance, including this impact?
We don't have those yet. Until we have the revenue estimates for the property tax collection in March, then we'll have projections for what, if any, fund balance we'll need.
For the fiscal year we're in, not for next year.
This fiscal year,
Mm-hmm.
we will not require any fund balance for this fiscal year, but for this 1.25 million that's before you now.
Okay.
Alderman Pan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, I'd like to congratulate you on your plan for using this money. I've spoken with you many times, and I think I speak for a number of my colleagues when I say that I can't stand it when we have a problem and somebody thinks they can solve it by throwing money at it. Having said that, as you know, I spent my career in one aspect of law enforcement, and I can say that the steps you're taking really puts our small police department into the the year 2017 in terms of technology, combining that with the extra man and woman power that is involved here is a critical step, I think, in helping to solve the crime problem we have. I think we need to emphasize that law enforcement is only part of the problem. It's a significant part of solving the problem, but this isn't going to do it. The problem is so complex that we could be here the rest of the night, something I don't intend to do if we were to discuss all the different causes. But I think this is potentially a really significant step. This isn't a situation where we're just giving you the money to say, hey, go fight the problem. You have a definitive plan that, the technology you're talking about is, right on the cutting edge. And for a department our size to be able to do some of the things that we hope to do with that technology, I think speaks very highly for your department and your leadership there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you. Chief, the revenue that's being used, this 1.25, comes from a fund balance. But next year, the cost of those 8 officers, and I have been a big proponent of increasing our force, but that cost will remain, as well as the cost for cameras and the like. And maybe this is something the Finance Committee had a discussion about. I missed part of that. Do we know what recurring cost will be? How much is it going to cost us in years out for these 8+ officers, plus the cameras, plus the license plate, the whole package? Did you?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to be clear, I used 8 as a number, and I used it for a reason. We have 111 officers right now. We're budgeted for 114. In speaking with my commanders and the teams that we have, our guesstimate essentially is that we may get 8 over the 114. And I looked today, as recently as today, and I see that there may be 7 viable candidates that we can hire in the next few weeks. And again, to let you know, if I had when I get the city's permission, I may hire 10 if I can get that fast, that many qualified officers going forward. But to answer your question, in speaking with the finance director, I think the estimate is over $100,000 with benefits that each officer encumbers, maybe upward of $125,000, depending on their pay scale. As you go further, through attrition, you'll hire more officers. Those officers become journeymen, and then they have rank. They may make more than that, but I think the average cost of an officer is probably 100 or less. So that would be a recurring cost, provided there's no attrition to offset that amount, and that would have to again be obviously in the budget going forward. For the camera equipment, we would actually own some of the unstated costs here that we're not putting in the estimate. Would be the annual recurring maintenance and connection fees. Mm-hmm. And the connection fees, we have estimates on what that will cost. It's not inexpensive, and that would have to go into the budget, and that's going to be over $100,000 to $150,000 as an estimate. But again, not outrageous for the value that we've gotten from the cameras, but I think it wouldn't be proper for me to really give you an estimate until I break it down. But those are recurring costs for the cameras. Body cameras have an annual cost too. I think in talking with the companies, Annapolis settles on body cameras. It could cost $300,000 to $500,000 to outfit everybody with body cameras over a 4 or 5 year period. Now there are programs that they have for financing these cameras, and we don't have all the costs in yet. But those cameras don't last forever. So after the 4 or 5 years, we may have to talk about getting other cameras. And so the average, it looks like about $100,000 is just a guess right now, Recurring annual costs will be around $100,000 for most of the companies that we looked at for cameras, for body-worn cameras. So again, these are estimates. Essentially, the cost of the personnel is the largest encumbrance, or the largest
I think
drain on the budget.
I'm sorry, Mr. Andrews was.
I think conservatively, you're looking at $1.5 to $1.75 million a year will be the annual cost of increasing the police force to this degree. That's be a conservative number.
So we can expect that the mayor's budget is going to be increased by 1.5, 1.7
Yes, ma'am.
is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
For next year and years out.
Well, for that increment anyway, there may be other modifications in the budget. The net number may be different, but for this purpose, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Alderman Pfeiffer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Finlayson and Alderman Littman, I thought both raised interesting questions about the Finance Committee. Spent a little time with the Chief and the City Manager and the Finance Director last week, drilling down into these issues, and I think all, I don't want to speak for all of you, but I do think there was certainly a consensus that in each of these areas we need to try something different, and we need to be more nimble and try and give you resources, and that the package that you had put together was thoughtful and sort of a good way to start an approach and giving you the flexibility to try different things and deploy the resources. But much of our conversation revolved around these questions that are being raised, because I hope to God when you deploy these things it works, and we see the decrease in these particular violent crimes that all of us want to see. But what's guaranteed is that we will, in the budget that will be delivered to us from the mayor in March, and in the subsequent budgets that any of us who are still up here or other folks who might be sitting up here have to deal with, we are basically crystallizing this at least $1.5 million, if not more, going forward. And I'm okay with that, but I think we have to have that conversation, and I think we have to people be aware that we are basically deploying a lot more resources in the near term, and if it works, and I hope it does, we will want to be able to continue those resources going forward. And there is a cost in the context of the last number of years, very, very tight budgets, balanced on sort of a razor's edge, that we have to basically embrace, and we got to figure out how to pay for. So I think that's hopefully the preview of coming attractions of the conversation we'll be having as the mayor delivers his budget to figure out how to make that a reality. So, thank you.
Alderman Kirby?
Chief, let me ask you this. We budgeted for, this year, your department was budgeted for what, 114?
Yes, 114 officers.
114, and you're at 111?
Currently.
Okay. So that's 3 spaces. Okay, so if this year, your budget will reflect 118, budget that comes to us?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay. I think we're all in agreement that we don't need the carnage that we've seen this year. I mean, I stopped short of putting some of these things here, but we keep talking about that, and I keep seeing them show up. But we'll have another conversation.
Alderman Littman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, a couple points I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. The 1.25 is just to get us through the next 6 months. So in the new budget, not all of these expenses are annual recurring expenses, but certainly the payroll officers are, so that portion is actually going to be doubled when it comes back to the full budget.
No, I don't think I estimated it that way. What I did was I estimated 50. First, again, it's a high estimate considering there's 6 months remaining in the fiscal year. We're at a higher 10 officers or 8 officers today, this minute. We may get close to that 584 with all of our extra help that we're asking for along the way, or really 542,000. But we're not going to be able to hire them today or tomorrow. It's going to be a sort of a protracted period. I don't think that it's doubled. It's not going to double from the 1 million. The 1 million, 1.25 million would be funds that we would get to use in a variety of ways, including hiring those officers. But we know we're never going to use that amount for even 10 extra officers, because there's only going to be a handful of months remaining in the fiscal year. So some of the remaining funds, again, I would capitalize on the opportunity to, again, use it for overtime and equipment and cameras and body-worn cameras.
And the second question I was looking to clarify, I don't think the budget last year funded 114 officers. The department had 114 positions, but the funding relied upon attrition and not replacing people so quickly, so it didn't give you complete funding for 114 officers.
I think that's true, yeah, with attrition. No, we were funded for 114 with an attrition as well,
which is different than budgeting for 114 officers.
That's correct.
Let me just say before I go over, crime is obviously an issue. There's a heroin epidemic. We've been very successful with Governor Hogan getting money. If we have to cut somewhere in the budget, we'll cut. If we have to find money from somewhere else, we're going to find the money. So a lot of these questions are coming around. It will be in my budget, the money Chief Priestup's talking about. Alderwoman Pendle Charles?
Since we're on the level of informing the public, I think it's only fair also, Chief, in 25 words or less, or however you can do it, to kind of explain your reorganization as well, to show that you have another component, not only as far as the funding is concerned, but also as far as the different posts and the officers and the supervisors that will be overseeing that as well.
25 words.
Okay, 30.
You just went
25
over.
seconds. A big focus for this year coming will be to improve our community relations and our community policing strategies. So our alignment right now will enable that, and it creates a framework, and we're going into the planning processes, and we're doing some things now automatically now. But the staffing and the allocation and the plan of how to use this fits into it because, again, it's going to enable more foot patrol and outreach and more programmatic things as well. But I think the takeaway from this is the community policing strategy will change for 2017, and the structure is enabling that, and it enables better quicker hiring and effective hiring and the right commanders in the right jobs.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to respond to the questions that Alderman Lippman raised, and not to be flip, but I think the first response is, how can we afford not to do this? I know my constituents are certainly pressing me, to do something different, but more importantly, to do something more effective. I think Alderwoman Pendle Charles hit the nail on the head. Increasing the police force isn't the only thing, that we are doing, because we're working other avenues, and secondly, it's not the only thing that we need to do. We really do need to work more with the community, and I think we've had some recent experience where the cab driver was shot, the community came forward and helped us immediately. That's a huge step forward. But I would redirect Alderman Lippman's question to us, and we are going to have to answer some tough questions in next year's budget. And I think we need to be doing that soul searching now, because the commitments we've made to fire and now to police are long-term commitments. They're not going to go away, and it is going to occupy a much larger portion of our budget. I think that's what our constituents want, but we need to start thinking about what our resources are and where we're spending them. And again, I hear from my constituents loud and clear that their public safety is very, very important to them. So, but we do have a lot of soul searching that we're going to have to do, starting with the Finance Committee after we get the mayor's budget. But we have some tough questions to ask of ourselves.
Alderman Kirby?
Yeah, I just, and Alderman on that, I hear you loud and clear. I think everybody's constituency across the city is yelling and screaming. Yours a bit louder, but it's the same end. The mayor's going to give us a budget. We're going to budget for X number of officers. I don't even like to sit here and talk about numbers, because I cringe every time Chief tells me how many cameras are here or how many people are going to be here. I cringe, because I know it's information in the wrong hands that does us a disservice, not as much of a service. wish that we would be briefed on those types of numbers, operational, and not the entire public, because I think it does him and his department a disservice. I'm in those communities, so I know what happens there. With Governor Hogan, I hope he is good to us, and I hope you find that out before you bring us that budget. Make it light on all of us, because we do have some soul searching to do. But it's obvious, one thing is obvious, we've got to find the money to do what we're asking the chief to do. So, I'm in total agreement with that. All right.
If there's no other discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Mr. City Attorney,
Thank
would
you.
you please present the next item on our agenda?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is legislative actions on second reader, beginning with Resolution R-4-17, David A. Jarrell.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules to allow passage for a resolution at the meeting of its introduction for R-417, the resolution for David Jarrell?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there a motion to adopt R-4-17 on second reader?
Second.
Any discussion? Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Penley.
Aye.
Alderman Kirby.
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Alderman Bud.
Aye.
Alderman Payon. Alderman Pendle Charles.
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson.
Aye.
Alderman Lippman.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is R-5-17, Gary M. Elson.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules to allow for passage of the resolution at the meeting of its introduction for R-5-17?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the motion I need to be added as a sponsor.
Right, as do I. I think
That's a piece of legislation.
Okay.
it went so fast, none of us got our names on there, but I think we all want to be on there.
City Clerk will make note of that. and-
Yes, mine as well.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Is there a motion to adopt R-5-17 on second reader?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panelidis.
Aye.
Alderman Kirby.
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Alderman Bud.
Aye.
Alderman Payon. Alderman Pendle Charles.
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson.
Aye.
Alderman Lippman.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is CA-3-16, Charter Amendment, City Manager.
Is there a motion to adopt CA 3-16 on second reader?
So moved.
Is there a second? Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Alderman Lippman?
Thank you. Mr. Leahy, did you get a chance to answer the question?
Which question are we discussing?
Sure. I believe that the original language had city administrator exempt in the exempt list,
That's correct.
and the change did not include city manager. So, is that correct, that city manager should not be in that list, or can you help me understand the question and then the answer?
Well, as I said to one of your colleagues earlier this evening, the question ultimately comes down to how we're defining the position. We'll have a title that will have a specific definition. As I understand it, even though city administrator was the exempt listed position, the HR office has referred to that as city manager for some time now. And I think the clarification that we consider them one and the same is the simplest way to clarify that. However, if indeed one wants to take the position that we have not changed the exempt list as of this date to incorporate city manager rather than city administrator. I think it is a ministerial act unless you define them differently. So I will leave that to the council, but I think it does not create a specific issue, again, unless you define them dramatically differently. And as I said, the HR office has used city manager for some time now in its discussion of the position.
So are you saying it's correct as it is to not have the city manager on the exempt employee list?
It is my impression that the intent was that the city manager be on the exempt list, and like so many things, folks did not look at the actual documentation. We've been using the term for some time, and my position, unless there is history to tell us otherwise, based on what I found, that we should consider the titles interchangeable. So I think the city manager should be incorporated, and again, that is something that the council will have to decide whether or not they want to take a specific action. As I said, I think it's ministerial and the terms are interchangeable.
I'm not sure. Let me ask it this way: do we need an amendment to this, or is it correct as it is?
I don't think we can we?
We can what?
I don't think we can amend it to put him on the exempt list, because that's not in this legislation.
If I may, I don't believe the exempt list is part of the city charter, which is what we're discussing here. So we can't amend it in this piece of legislation.
That is correct.
May I ask, isn't it in the HR handbook or manual that we are?
It's in the code. It's not in the charter.
It's in the code.
Okay. But I was referring to that handbook that we haven't gotten back to yet.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of my colleagues have opined today that somehow this is a backdoor to go to a council manager form of government. So I think we should make clear that this is not that. This is a change that we made several years ago. It was legislation that Alderwoman Finlayson and I can't remember who else offered, actually I think even under a previous administration, to move to the city manager title from city administrator. Okay, so this is nothing new. What we're simply doing with this legislation is doing some housekeeping, because not everything got corrected to reflect those changes of years ago. This is not in any way a movement to council manager.
And that is my understanding, which is why I'm sorry I wasn't clear. I believe we have incorporated city manager as it is intended and has been used in your day-to-day operations, and this is to clarify in the charter that that is the position we currently operate with.
Okay. Thank you.
And not a prelude to the council manager form of government. Because Ross is exactly
right. Well,
correct.
I mean, to move to a council manager form of government, you folks are going to have to take a number of actions, and
Correct.
changing
Correct.
this title
Correct.
does nothing to move you in that
Well,
direction.
that's maybe I didn't tell you correctly this afternoon, but that's exactly what my legislation, I mean, that's the questions I was asking. Wondering if we even needed to do this tonight without a legal opinion of some type, because I know there was friction in the city at large. I mean,
Well, as I've said, you as a council will have to take specific action to change the form of government.
Right.
And I don't believe changing this title to conform to the language you've used for several years is a step in that direction.
Okay, so this just cleans up the code.
That's correct.
All right.
Well, the charter.
Alderman Pfeiffer? I would say it's closer to if we changed our titles from everywhere in the code, it says alderman to city councilman. It doesn't really change much of the substance of how we work. but because we have made this change in years past, you're just cleaning up the verbiage. It's not.
That's how I have interpreted it, and that
Me too.
is my intent in saying to you, I think it's a ministerial act.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Is there a motion to adopt CA 316 on third reader?
So moved.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Panladies?
Aye.
Alderman Kirby?
Aye.
Alderman Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett?
Aye.
Alderman Bud?
Aye.
Alderman Payon?
Aye.
Alderman Pendel Charles?
Aye.
Alderman Finlayson?
Aye.
And Alderman Lippman.
Aye. The ayes have it. We will take a 10-minute break and reconvene at
Getting ready to send this to Stokes. I'm sitting on a firefighter's lap. That's in, my brother and I went to paint night, and this is a statue outside the restaurant where we were. I don't know why that just popped up on my phone. I don't know where it came from.
the City Council is now back in session. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our next item?
Legislation, because it expires.
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is O-50-16, Title 17, Buildings and Construction.
Is there a motion to adopt O 5016 on second reader? Is there a second? We have before us two proposed amendments. One is from the Economic Matters Committee, and the other is the Budge proposed amendment. And I'll let the Economic Matters speak first.
Mr. City Attorney, or Mr. Mayor, excuse me. I like to go slightly out of order. Because both Alderman Arnett and I have some questions about the underlying, about a portion of the underlying legislation that I believe is going to end up with us asking to postpone the legislation for further consideration. And if we go down that route, we know from prior experience that discussions we've had about amendments have to be done all over again. So rather than spinning our wheels, I'd rather we get our questions out of the way first, if that's amenable to the council.
Certainly amenable. Do you want me to bring Mr. Gutwald up here and put him on the hot seat? Mr. Manassas, if you join us in the front.
No, let's bring him up for discussion. He was on the hot seat last Thursday.
Thank you. I received some query from constituents today with concern about the changes to the residential fire sprinkler requirements. And I know that Mr. Manasseh has been in conversations with my constituent as well. But I would like to start with the basics because our colleagues on the council haven't heard this. And could you describe for the council what you told the Economic Matters Committee on why you were proposing these changes? Will it get us all on common ground before we start talking about what we do with them?
Gladly. The current method by which we evaluate 1 and 2 family dwelling, rehab, modification, any permit coming in to deal with reconstruction of existing homes, 1 and 2 family dwellings specifically. We're not talking about apartment buildings or anything like that. So we're dealing with 1 and 2 family dwellings. When they bring in a building permit application, we look at the State Department of Assessment and Taxation value for improvement. Then depending on whether they're in the historic district or out of the historic district, we look at the value of the assessed improvement, say it's $100,000, in the historic district. If the building permit application shows a value greater than half of that, so it's greater than $50,000, they would have to put in a sprinkler system. Outside the historic district, if the value of the construction exceeds 75%. So if you're looking at that same $100,000 assessed improvement on the property, and you have a $75,000 building permit, then you would put in a sprinkler system. Our problem with that is trying to verify the actual cost of a construction project, because all the numbers vary from each application. Some people put in different values for labor, different values for the cost of the equipment, the supplies, the type of work that they're trying to do. So that's one arbitrary part that we are trying to deal with. The second arbitrary part is that if you look on a given street and you look at the assessed value of each piece of property, now the houses are all relatively similar, but some of them may be ridiculously low. Like the property seems like it's a little rancher, but it's valued at $20,000. But yet its land is more expensive. You go down the street a little bit further, and you'll see one that the house is valued at $70,000, but the land isn't as much. The final number looks about the same across the street, but the numbers are different. But we only look at the improvement. So in one case, the resident is dealing with a $20,000 assessed improvement on the property. So that means their threshold for putting in a sprinkler is very small. They don't have to do much, and they've got to put in a sprinkler. Whereas down the street, where for some unknown reason to us, the value of the improvement is much higher, they could do a much larger project without putting in a sprinkler system. It's completely arbitrary. So what we're pursuing with our change in this piece of code is that when we look at a building permit for that same project, we want to look at area. If they're exceeding 50% of the area of the structure in a construction project, then we want to apply the sprinkler requirement. So if you've got a 1,000 square foot house and you're going to do modification to 500 square feet, then you're going over that 50% threshold, and you need to put in the sprinkler system. It's something that everybody can agree on. It's an area. You can measure it on paper, you can measure it on site. And it becomes much easier for us. We don't deal with the arbitrary part of value of construction and cost of materials and labor, nor do we deal with the sometimes fluid numbers that we see for assessed value. So it's very simple to us. And what I think we're doing with this piece of legislation is making it sort of a fair playing field across the board.
Thank you. And I would like to reiterate that what we said during the Economic Matters Committee meeting is that I thoroughly support the direction you're going here, trying to make this unambiguous, straightforward, and less of a headache for both yourselves and the public to figure out as they come in for their permits. That's the intent of where we're going. The exchange that we had today with my constituent suggests to me, however, that we aren't quite there yet. That even those of us who have knocked around with planning and zoning for a while think we understand what you're talking about when you say area. But when you get three different architects, building attorneys, and other folks involved, suddenly it becomes a little less clear. And so I think this would benefit from us taking a little time to put together some better language to define what we mean by area. I was a little surprised in looking at the code that there wasn't certainly an obvious place, either in Title 17 or in the building code, talking about what area meant, the way we define it in the planning in Title 21. So I think maybe either steal some of that language or reference it or something, but I hesitate to try to come up with that language on the fly here tonight, and that's probably not a good idea. So, and then I know that Alderman Arnett had some concerns that I would love for him to express.
Well, I think if the intends to postpone, maybe we could certainly do that and then address Alderman Arnett's in a committee meeting, unless you want to address them now.
Well, I do want to make a generalized statement because we grappled with this on the council before, and in fact, the way it was years ago when I started was floor area. And I'm really at a loss, but we were talking with people from public safety, and we were advised at that time that doing it by a percent of the value of new work going in divided by the total assessed value would get more sprinkling. And that was at that time the goal of the committee, and the recommendation from public safety folks was we want to get these houses sprinkled whenever we can. There's no doubt about the fact that adding a sprinkler system is a major a new investment over top of what you're doing. So you're putting in a new kitchen, it's $40,000, and you then have to put in a sprinkler, and that's another $30,000 or whatever the number is. But the public safety goal is to get as many buildings sprinkled as we can. So the question I asked you earlier before the meeting started is, what gives us more sprinkled properties? Doing it by floor area, doing it by value? I think the answer to that, and then I understand and accept your problem, because on my street there are many houses that have been owned forever, and they're much cheaper than my house. I wish I could have bought my house for what their house is assessed at, and so we do have a very uneven playing field. So I applaud your desire to level the playing field, but I think I agree with Alderman Budge that we need to take one more crack at this to understand more fully, and particularly with confusion from constituents. I have a constituent that I couldn't get to today but begged me to call him because he's in the construction business, and he said, there's a lot of problems, and I'm thinking, oh, so I don't think we're ready for prime time quite yet.
I would entertain a motion to postpone. Alderwoman Finlayson, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Just a quick question. When we changed the code previously, did we have a sprinkler fund at the time?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Entertain a motion to postpone.
Motion to postpone to our next council meeting.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, John. We'll get there.
Mr. City Attorney, would you please present our next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is R-34-16, Michael A. Pristoop, Chief of Police.
Is there a motion to postpone R-34-16 on second reader? Alderman Arnett? You wanna
Yes,
say-
thank you, Mayor.
Or is there a second? I'm sorry.
Second.
Alderman Arnett?
As my colleagues rightly remember, I was not enamored with the idea of postponing when this came up the first time, but the logic was to allow the committee that Alderman Payon is chairing to continue its pursuits in examining matters brought up by the caucus of African American leaders and other matters, and also advise us on how we handle questions of disparate treatment in the future. And I think that that logic for postponing still obtains because that committee is not done.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
This is postponed for 60 days. Is that enough, Fred?
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Mr. Mayor, the next item on the agenda is legislative actions on first reader, beginning with Ordinance O-3-17, Annual City Budget Submission Dates.
Is there a
Mr. Mayor, could I, before we get to that, could I just for a moment, go back to 3416.
Sure.
I, without thinking, kind of by rote, voted on that to postpone, and I have indicated that I am recusing myself from consideration. That means all consideration, and I would like to have that stricken if Your Honor doesn't mind. I do not intend to participate and did not intend to vote on that.
Situation's never come up before, so I'll defer to the city clerk, but if we can do that, we certainly will. Let the record reflect that. Is there a motion to adopt 0317 on first reader?
So moved.
What are these? I don't have these.
Is there a second?
It's our,
This is your.
please second it.
This is your legislation.
Oh, our new
It's
thing.
your
Yes.
legislation.
Oh, God, yes.
And Alderman Arnett, I'll let you describe it, please.
I'm sitting here going through my iPad, of course it's not on there. Yeah. Thank you, I'm not insane. I have,
Any discussion?
Yes, you are.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I refer 0317 to the Finance Committee, the Rules and City Government Committee, and the Financial Advisory Board. Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the next item?
Mr. Mayor, the agenda has been completed.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
second.
All in favor, please say aye. All
Point of
opposed?
information, what's the score?
The ayes have it.
Go Tigers.